Up until now, Karoline Leavitt has never been frightened by the spotlight. In an instant, nobody anticipated it. Her eyes were watering and her voice was shaking as she stepped in front of the cameras. This time something was different. Suddenly, the self-assured vocal person we have come to know was exposed. When she made a startling revelation about her husband, her emotions were raw. Was it a decision that changed your life, a heartbreak, or something else entirely? Her statements surprised everyone as the room went silent, and now, at last, the truth is being revealed. What is this reality? Karoline Leavitt didn't exactly have a normal path to the national scene. She didn't have a clear path or grow up in a political dynasty. She grew up in a family that owned a used truck dealership and an ice cream business in a small New Hampshire town. However, there was something about Karoline even in those early days. She was ambitious, driven, and didn't hesitate to speak up. As college rolled around, that fire just became more intense. Karoline made headlines, wrote daring op-eds, defended Trump's policies, and even founded her school's first broadcasting club while the majority of students were attempting to pass exams. She wasn't simply another opinionated student, she was ensuring that they were heard, and they were. She immediately entered conservative politics after prominent figures took notice. An internship at Fox News led to a position at the White House, where Kayleigh McEnany was her direct supervisor. Thereafter, she rose to prominence in political communications as the Director of Communications for Representative Elise Stefanik. Karoline did more than just make her mark in a world where it can be difficult for young voices to be heard. She made sure she couldn't be ignored. We're seeing a different side of her today, though. The tough, self-assured Karoline is crying as she makes a big news about her spouse in front of the cameras. And believe me, nobody anticipated this. Like an incident she went through after winning a new election, Karoline's career wasn't without its difficulties. You could really hear the implicit skepticism lingering in the air as the press room was humming. Expectations weren't very high as the youngest White House press secretary in history prepared to take the podium. Some assumed she would be cautious, follow the plan, and possibly make a mistake. Others thought she would be anxious and overwhelmed by the situation. Then she took charge. She was obviously not here to follow the old rules as soon as she began talking. The duration of her initial briefing was 47 minutes. By the norms of an opening day, that is a marathon. However, it was more than just the duration that sparked conversation. It was the way she dealt with it. There were no carefully worded non-answers or evading difficult queries. Rather, she confronted the media directly, pointing out their bias, contesting their stories, and making it apparent that she wasn't merely another mouthpiece. She was in charge. Even Peter Alexander from NBC pressed her with challenging questions, perhaps thinking she would falter, but she did not. She refused to back down, responding confidently and without once appearing shaken. Expecting inexperience, the skeptics had entered. They saw someone who was well-versed in her field instead. Let's move on. This moment was not a coincidence. Long before she ever stood at the podium, she was getting ready for it. She was already studying the game at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire, where she was learning about the relationship between politics and the media. After gaining this information, she was hired as an assistant press secretary in the Trump White House, and then rose to the position of national press secretary for his 2024 campaign. She wasn't merely a passenger. In one of the most difficult political circumstances, she was learning, adjusting, and establishing herself. But her confidence wasn't the only thing that made her stand out. It was her plan. She observed a change in the media environment. While independent voices, podcasters, social media influencers, and non-traditional journalists were reaching a wider audience than ever before, established news channels were losing ground. She leaned into that shift rather than resisting it. She wasted little time attempting to gain favor with traditional media. She delivered the administration's message directly to the audience on the platforms. A new face at the podium wasn't the only thing at stake here. It concerned a radical change in the White House's public relations strategy. She made it clear right away that she was redefining a role. The same traditional media groups and reporters had been asking the same questions at White House press briefings for years. But everything changed when Leavitt took control. All of a sudden, independent internet voices, podcast hosts, and conservative influencers were seated at the table. It was a startling move to the political establishment. It was just simple sense to her. Traditional news was no longer being seen by millions of Americans. Why, therefore, should the White House disregard them? And her strategy succeeded, whether people liked it or not. The most effective press conference ever was even called by White House Communications Director Stephen Chung. DC went into a frenzy after hearing just one statement. The previous paradigm, in which the narrative was dominated by the mainstream media, was no longer viable. Not everyone was a fan, of course. Although Leavitt was obviously a contentious choice, her politics weren't the only thing under investigation. She made headlines about her personal life as well. She wed 59-year-old real estate tycoon Nicholas Riccio, who was 32 years her senior. A lot of people had opinions. Was it affection? Was there a plan? It was considered a scandal by some. Others don't give a damn. In any case, she was unfazed by the noise. Her concerns were more significant. Then, the entire universe was turned upside down. The 13th of July 2024, a Trump rally in Pennsylvania's Butler. It was electric energy. Then there were gunshots. There was anarchy. Donald Trump was shot. Agents from the Secret Service flooded in. Supporters let up a yell. Despite his bleeding, he remained upright. The nation wasn't the only one shaken by the incident. Everything altered as a result. It struck Leavitt on a very new level. That day she wasn't among the crowd. Washington wasn't even where she was. She was rocking her 3-day-old baby son at home. As if it were just another campaign rally, she had switched it on. Abruptly she found herself helpless to do anything but remain motionless as she watched history play out in real time. The video kept playing over and over. Like a goods train, its weight struck her. She was holding this small, delicate life as a new mother. She was a political fighter nevertheless. She also knew in her heart that this was about more than just Trump. It had to do with the future. She therefore made a choice that most new mothers would not even think about. "I'm going back 4 days," she remarked, turning to face her spouse. She only gave herself that. She reappeared on screen in the fight 4 days after giving birth. The public was taken aback. How was she able to do that? Why would she? Her body was still recovering. Her infant had only been born for a week. For Leavitt, however, the solution was straightforward. She then stated that the president almost died defending this nation. Returning to work was the least I could do. Some referred to it as loyalty. It was referred to as lunacy by some. However, it was simply doing what was to be done to her. For her, Trump's survival was more than simply another crazy political moment. It was a declaration. It demonstrated that even in the face of the world's attempts to bring you down, you could remain upright by tenacity, resolve, and plain stubbornness. What was her argument for quitting if he could take a bullet and go on? Let's be honest though. It wasn't easy to return to politics while caring for a newborn. She was battling reporters at the White House podium one moment. The next day she questioned whether her child even recognized her appearance. "It's awful that she leaves her child every day. It breaks your heart," she said. Did she slow down though? No way. She simply wasn't like that. She had a secret weapon, to be honest. She is married to Nicholas Riccio. The man was the glue that held everything together behind the scenes. But he wasn't one for the limelight. He was at home making sure their youngster was fed, taken care of, and presumably not already planning his escape from the cot while she dealt with the bustle of Washington. She was fortunate that he was able to step up in ways that most people would never see because of his business career. Although the nation had been rocked by the assassination attempt, she saw it as a gut check. It brought to mind the reasons behind her decision, and the sacrifices she made for things that most people would take for granted, and why it was just not an option to step away. She wasn't just keeping her composure when she faced the media a few days after one of the most horrifying events in contemporary politics. She was going all out. However, no one anticipated that beneath her cool-headed facade, something more intimate would surface. In addition to juggling politics and parenting, she was ready to reveal something shocking about her spouse that would make everyone take notice. These days, every interaction in the political sphere is examined as if it were a detective case. What about her union with Nicholas Riccio? People's eyebrows were raised. But unlike the typical DC power couple pairings, theirs wasn't predicated on political connections or professional advancements. One of those stuffy high-energy events when everyone shakes hands, makes power moves, and acts like they're not tired is where they met at a political event. She was already in her element and on the rise. Riccio, a real estate tycoon with more wealth than most people could imagine, was not interested in getting involved in politics. The man seldom ever spoke to reporters, much less gave a damn about headlines. Nevertheless, something clicked when a mutual acquaintance introduced them. They didn't make sense on paper. She was youthful, driven, and loved being in the spotlight. He was 32 years older, social media phobic, and unconcerned with the most recent Twitter controversy. In a world when Instagram followers are essentially used to gauge success, he had none. For the sake of tradition, don't use LinkedIn, Twitter, or even a Facebook page. That was unprecedented for someone with his degree of power. They perceived balance where others saw a mismatch. She created waves and commanded rooms. He was the taciturn tactician. Very good sideline observation. They had more than one unusual relationship. It was the type that prompted conversation. Some people didn't understand. Some people adored it. However, it just worked for them. It kept coming up in conversation.